I do think journalism is quite important, and yes, things are a little bit dark out there. I'm an investigative journalist. I tend to run toward the tragic, the unjust, and the illegal. And so I'm not really one to put a rosy color on the way the world runs. Now, that being said, it's not necessarily what they say that kind of gets to me, it's how they say it. So somber, so solemn, so full of dread. Do they not think that the journalists of today are up to the task? It's no secret, journalism is certainly under threat. We just saw the complete dismantling of the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and you'd have to be hiding under a rock the last couple years to not have heard the rhetoric about the media as the enemy of the people. And all this is unfolding against a backdrop of disappearing local newsrooms, a collapse of the business model that underpinned print journalism for so many years. And all the while, we got the AI-generated, bot-disseminated misinformation that everybody's guzzling up in favor of, let's call it, the truth. But, you know, I'm not so despairing. I'm actually quite hopeful about where journalism is, and I'm pretty excited. I'll tell you why. If I say imagine the golden era of journalism, what comes to mind? I imagine you think of, the Pentagon Papers, Watergate. For those of you in the room who are a little young, this was the 1970s, so certainly older than some people's dads. These folks who broke those stories were titans of the field, but they dealt in ink and paper. They had notepads and phones. The people I work with harness satellites. We scrape massive data sets online, and we work with teams that are scattered across the globe. I personally once worked with a Chinese journalist working out of London to track beef from the Brazilian Amazon to Hong Kong using a data set that was compiled in Sao Paulo and analyzed for us by someone in Mexico City. And if that's not enough, what really tied together this supply chain for us was information we got from analyzing freely available satellite imagery from Google Earth, and by trawling, Chinese TikTok for meat influencer videos. I swear it's a thing. The guys who did Watergate could never. And that's because the journalists of today are jacks of all trades, or if they individually are not, their teams are. The amount of data that we can access that is just at our fingertips is sort of mind-boggling to comprehend. A database that I use a lot is called ALIPH. It's run by a group called OCCRP, the Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project. Now, ALIPH holds data like tax ID numbers, birthdays, corporate ownership, party affiliations for, I would say, 230 million entities across 140 countries. That's one resource that we can use. So think of the scale that we can leverage. And this is why stories today, investigative stories in particular, are done in a way that was completely unthinkable, let alone impossible for the reporters of yesteryear. An outfit that I particularly like is called the Outlaw Ocean Project. Now, this is a group that specializes in investigations at sea. So they'll cover things like illegal fishing, slavery at sea, mercenaries at sea. And they do a lot of vessel tracking, so finding where boats are going when. You can do this by looking at the signal that transponders that boats have carry, where they're going. They use this to avoid collisions. But if you're doing something illegal, you're probably switching that off. So then what do? You can turn to the satellites, to night light detections. These are images taken at night of the great dark expanse of the ocean, but ships have lights on them. You can cross-reference this with other data that you find, maybe the transponder data. You can look at where people are operating and when to get a sense of what they're doing. Now, these guys at the Outlaw Ocean, they've kind of gone above and beyond. They'll actually get on a boat, go out there, find the boat, call them on the radio, get on board, and report from there. You can imagine the stories that they tell are not only covering trends across oceans and continents, but grounded in deeply personal stories. It's truly exquisite. Even the team I work with at the investigative reporting program just over here at Berkeley, we spent about 1.5 years investigating a land conflict in northern Brazil. We used government data. We used court records. We also used information from social media to track how a major corporation was gobbling up land with falsified land records, taking it away from indigenous and Black groups who had lived there for hundreds of years. We used the same methodology to then see how these groups forcibly, in an armed way, retook that land, The two sides are now fighting a war in the Amazon. So journalists do this, yes, because it's our job and we want to figure out what's going on. But I think this new era heralds something different. When you can investigate something like this so deeply from so far away, you then arrive on the ground with a level of legitimacy that maybe other reporters didn't have before. This example in the Amazon, we were able to build really trusting and deep relationships with the folks in these communities, but because we came in not just with questions, but with some answers and an understanding of what was already happening. So the journalists of today are deeply collaborative in a way that maybe before they weren't. I think gone are the days of the maverick investigative reporter chain smoking at his desk, going through documents. Now it's a team sport. And with open source data, we've really blown the door open to whoever wants to help and can help. We work across organizations with people with different expertise. And our sources are no longer just resources to be mined for information, but partners in the act of storytelling. And this has made the stories we tell deeper, more authentic, and grounded in a deeper reality. So if you look at then this sort of collaborative effort, you see that and more people can be involved because the barrier for entry is just having a laptop and logging on. For you young people in the room, just think it's much easier now for you to be involved in journalism at a very high level. At the Human Rights Center, where I also work, undergraduate students contributed to the canceled, then uncanceled 60 Minutes report about the prison in El Salvador. They looked at videos of the facility and were able to authenticate and verify claims made by people who were detained there. So I would argue that we are now in a golden age of journalism. And I think we're really just at the beginning. If you look just 2 years ago, the New York Times did a really incredible project where they trained an AI system to look at satellite imagery and recognize craters made by 2,000-pound bombs, these very large munitions used by major militaries. They then took that system and had it look at imagery from all across Gaza. They were able to identify when and where these munitions were used and found that they had been dropped in areas designated safe for civilians. Quite an incredible feat. And at the time, it took the New York Times, one of the largest news organizations in the world, to do that. You fast forward a couple years, a colleague of mine is training his own AI system out of the comfort of his home office. Now, he taught it the California Public Records Act. So what this system does for him is it helps him field the dozens upon dozens of public records requests that he's making daily for an ongoing investigation. Something that would have been impossible for him by himself to ever have done. Now the scope of his investigation, the depth that he can achieve in his work is, I won't say limitless, but quite close to it. And I'm not a person here to be extolling the powers of AI or whatever. There are smarter people who can do that much better than I. But I do want to emphasize that we're living in a world now where the ambition that a journalist can afford to have, the scope of a story that we can imagine, is really only limited by our own curiosity and our own desire to really get out there and understand some phenomenon. I personally am incredibly excited by that notion. So the next time I'm at a holiday party or something else and someone says to me very seriously, "Oh God, journalism, so important," I hope they do it with a smile on their face. Because if indeed we do live in such dark and desperate times, aren't we lucky that those times are now? When the journalists who are doing the work are at the absolute top of their game and the tools they have are the most powerful tools to ever have been used. So I would say to you, and I would say to everyone else, if we are to confront the chaotic future, yes, believe journalists. But more than that, I would say, believe in the journalists. Thank you.